"You're not invited. She doesn't want you there." The message came through while I was mid-sentence, standing in front of a room full of executives explaining a rollout I'd spent weeks preparing. My phone kept buzzing against the table until I finally stepped out. I read it once. Then again, slower this time, like the meaning might change if I gave it a second chance. It didn't. Another text followed almost immediately, something about keeping the day peaceful, like I was the disruption they needed to remove. I leaned against the hallway wall, staring at the screen, trying to line that up with everything I'd already done. The venue deposit, the catering contract, the photographer they fell in love with. All of it had come from me. And for a moment, I actually wondered if I had somehow misunderstood my role in all of this. But the silence on my phone told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't part of the wedding. I didn't grow up in a house where people sat down and assigned roles. No one ever said, "You take care of this, she takes care of that." It just settled that way over time. Seren was always the easy one, the one people described as light spontaneous, a little messy in a way that felt charming instead of concerning. She forgot deadlines, missed appointments, changed plans last minute. And somehow it all got brushed off like it was part of her personality. I was the opposite. If something needed to be handled, it ended up with me. When the pipes burst during a winter freeze, I was the one sitting on the kitchen floor with a towel under my knees, Googling emergency plumbers while my mom paced in circles. When the electric bill got missed again, I was the one calling the utility company, trying to sound older than I was asking for extensions we couldn't really afford. I don't remember anyone asking me to do those things. I just remember the way the room would go quiet until I stepped in. And once you become that person, it's hard to stop. Seren got to figure herself out. That's what my mom always said, usually with a soft sigh like it explained everything. She's still finding her way. I guess I skipped that part. By the time I left for college, I had systems for everything: budgets, schedules, backup plans. I didn't trust things to work out unless I made them work. I chose a school across the country partly for the program, partly for the distance. 2 duffel bags, a one-way flight, and a quiet promise to myself that I wouldn't build my life around cleaning up someone else's. And for a while, I didn't. I worked, saved, kept my world small and predictable. No big risks, no big dependencies. When the startup I joined got acquired, the money showed up in my account like it didn't quite belong there. I didn't celebrate. I didn't tell anyone right away. I just exhaled. It felt like space. For the first time, I wasn't bracing for something to go wrong. That didn't last. The calls started slowly. My dad's car breaking down. My mom cutting back her hours. Seren needing help with rent after a lease fell through. None of it sounded unreasonable on its own. And I didn't wait to be asked directly. I could hear it in their voices before they said anything. So I stepped in. Not because anyone forced me to. Because it felt like what I was supposed to do. By the time Seren called me the night she got engaged, I already knew how the conversation would go before she said a single word. She was breathless, talking too fast, describing the sunset, the boat, the ring. It sounded like something she'd been imagining for years, like she had finally stepped into the version of her life she always believed would just happen. She said she wanted something small, simple, intimate. Then she mentioned the venue. And I remember standing there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall, doing the math in my head before she even finished the sentence. Because I knew exactly how much small and simple was going to cost. And I also knew without her saying it out loud who was going to make it happen. She sent the spreadsheet 2 days later, not as a question, not even as a real conversation. Just a link dropped into our text thread with a quick, "Tell me what you think." I opened it during lunch, expecting a rough draft, maybe a few ideas, some placeholders. What I saw looked finished. Clean columns, color-coded categories. Vendor names already filled in, like decisions had been made without me. At the bottom, there was a number, $120,000. I stared at it longer than I needed to, like maybe it would adjust itself if I didn't react too quickly. It didn't. A minute later, Seren called. "So, what do you think?" she asked, voice light, like we were talking about paint colors. "It's a lot," I said carefully. There was a pause, then a small laugh on her end. "Yeah, but it's not all at once. And Caleb's parents said they might help. They're just figuring things out. Might help." I leaned back in my chair, eyes still on the spreadsheet. The venue alone was half of it. Catering was locked in. The photographer had a deposit deadline circled in red. Okay, I said, more to end the silence than anything else. That was enough. The first transfer went out that same afternoon. Venue deposit. A number large enough that my bank app asked me to confirm twice before processing it. Seren texted back almost instantly. Oh my God, thank you. I knew you'd understand. Understand what exactly I didn't ask. After that, things started moving faster. There was always something that couldn't wait. The florist needed a rush deposit to secure the date. The dress she loved was about to be discontinued. The band Caleb liked had a sudden opening if we committed within 48 hours. Each message carried the same tone, urgent, a little breathless. Just enough pressure to make it feel like a now or never situation. And every time I said yes. Not out loud, not dramatically. Just a transfer, a confirmation email. A quick done sent back so she wouldn't have to worry about it anymore. Weeks passed like that. I built a budget tracker to keep everything organized, logging each payment, each contract, each deadline. It gave me something solid to hold on to, some sense that this was still structured, still reasonable. But every now and then, I'd scroll back to that first spreadsheet and notice how little had changed on her side. Caleb's parents were still considering. No numbers added, no commitments locked in. Just that same line sitting there like it didn't need to be resolved. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, the plan stopped feeling shared. It started feeling like something I was funding while watching from the edge. By the third invoice, I stopped asking what anything cost. Not because it didn't matter, but because every time I brought it up, the conversation slipped sideways. Seren would sigh or laugh it off or pivot into how stressful everything had become. Somehow the numbers turned into emotions. And the emotions made it feel unreasonable to keep talking about the numbers. So I adjusted. I told myself this was temporary. That once the wedding was over, things would settle back into something normal. That this wasn't a pattern, just a moment. But the moment kept stretching. I started noticing small gaps, things that didn't quite line up. A group chat I wasn't part of even though I was covering most of the expenses. A vendor meeting scheduled in the middle of my workday that no one thought to mention. A cake tasting I only found out about because Seren posted a picture, smiling with a caption about finally choosing the one. Each time I asked, there was always a reason. I didn't think you'd be free. It was kind of last minute. I didn't want to bother you with every little detail. It was always framed like consideration, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like being slowly moved out of something I had built from the ground up. I tried to adjust again. Moved meetings, took calls on trains, showed up whenever I could just to stay involved. I told myself she was overwhelmed, that weddings did this to people, that I was reading too much into it. That explanation held until one afternoon when I stopped by a boutique hotel near Seren's apartment. She had asked me to print a few contracts and drop them off, and I figured I'd grab a coffee before heading back. The cafe was quiet, low music, a couple of people on laptops. I ordered turn to find a seat, and then I heard my name. I didn't look right away. It's a strange instinct you hear yourself mentioned and freeze instead of moving. Seren was sitting 2 tables over, facing away from me, leaning in toward Kendra. Her maid of honor. She's being such a control freak, Seren said, not even lowering her voice. Just because she's paying doesn't mean it's her wedding. Kendra made a small sound, something between a laugh and agreement. I mean, I get it, she added. But at least you're not going into debt. Seren let out a soft laugh. Honestly, I just wish she'd send the money and stay out of it. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, coffee still in my hand, feeling the weight of something shift into place, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make everything before it feel different. I didn't walk over, didn't interrupt. I turned around, left the coffee untouched on the counter, and stepped back out onto the street. The air felt colder than it should have. That night, I opened the budget file again, scrolling through rows of numbers I had memorized by now. For the first time, I wasn't checking totals. I was looking at it like it belonged to someone else. And somewhere between the 3rd tab and the 5th receipt, a quiet thought settled in one I couldn't quite push away anymore. Maybe I had never been part of this wedding, just the part that made it possible. The message didn't come from Seren. That was the first thing that felt off. It showed up in the middle of a Monday stand-up. tucked between deployment alerts and Slack notifications from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. "Hey, I heard you're not coming to the wedding. Hope you're okay." I stared at it for a second, trying to place the name. It clicked a moment later, one of Caleb's cousins. We'd met once briefly at a dinner I had paid for. Before I could respond, another message came in. "Soren said you've been having a hard time lately, that things got a little overwhelming." The word sat there longer than it should have. Overwhelming. I didn't answer. I closed the message, but the feeling stayed like something had shifted just out of sight. And I was the last one to notice. I called my mom during a break, stepping into the stairwell where the signal was always a little spotty. She picked up on the third ring. "Talia, I was actually going to call you tonight," she said, her voice already careful, like she'd been rehearsing. "What did she tell them?" I asked. There was a pause. "Not long, but long enough. She just said you've been under a lot of stress," my mom replied. "That maybe it's been affecting how you've been acting." I leaned back against the wall, staring at the chipped paint across from me. "Acting how she didn't mean anything by it," my mom added quickly. "It's just Caleb's parents are very particular. She didn't want anything to jeopardize the day." Jeopardize. I let that sit for a second. So instead of saying, "I've been paying for most of this wedding," while being left out of every decision, I said, keeping my voice even, she told them, "I'm unstable." "That's not what she said," my mom insisted, softer now. "You're twisting it." I almost smiled at that, because for a long time that's what I thought I was doing. Misreading things, overthinking, connecting dots that weren't really there. But this time the picture was clear. She needed a reason, I said, and I was the easiest one to turn into it. Silence again. Then quieter, Talia. Families go through things. It's complicated. I pushed off the wall, suddenly aware of how small the stairwell felt. "No," I said. "It's actually not." I ended the call before she could soften it further. Back at my desk, my screen had gone dark. My reflection stared back at me, faint, layered over lines of code I had written earlier that morning. For a long time, I had believed that if I showed up consistently enough, if I solved enough problems before they became visible, I would eventually be seen for it, that it would count. But standing there, with someone else's version of me already circulating in rooms I hadn't even entered, something settled into place. Not anger, not even hurt, not in the way I expected. Just a kind of stillness. A recognition that nothing I did from this point forward was going to change how they chose to see me. And once that realization landed, something else followed quietly behind it. If I wasn't part of the wedding, then I didn't have to keep holding it together. I didn't decide all at once. It wasn't some dramatic moment where everything snapped into place and I suddenly knew exactly what to do. It was quieter than that, more like something settling. That afternoon, I closed my laptop earlier than usual and just sat there for a while, hands resting on the desk, not moving. My inbox kept filling. Notifications blinked in the corner of the screen. I didn't open them. For the first time in months, I wasn't trying to stay ahead of anything. I went home while it was still light out, something I hadn't done in weeks. The apartment felt different, without the constant hum of planning in the background. No spreadsheets open, no tabs stacked with vendor emails, just space. I made tea, forgot about it, found it again when it had already gone cold. And somewhere in that silence, the question shifted. Not, how do I fix this? But why am I still holding it together? I walked over to the dining table where a folder of printed contracts had been sitting untouched since the weekend. I flipped it open, scanning names I recognized immediately, the venue, the caterer, the florist. Every single one tied back to me, my name on the transfers, my email on the confirmations, my number listed as the primary contact more often than not. I sat down and pulled my laptop back toward me, opening the master budget file. For a second, I hesitated. Not because I didn't know what I was about to do, because I did. And once I started, there wasn't a version of this where I went back to how things were. I moved the cursor to a blank space and opened a new tab instead. No spreadsheets, no tracking. Just a clean document. I typed 3 words at the top: pending, cancelable, non-refundable. Then I began going through everything line by line. No rush, no emotion pushing me forward. Just a kind of focus I hadn't felt in a long time. Some contracts had flexible cancellation windows. Others were tighter. A few deposits were already gone, locked in, no matter what. I made notes, marked dates, flagged anything that required a call instead of an email. Hours passed without me noticing. Outside, the light faded. The room dimmed around me, but I didn't turn on the lamp. By the time I leaned back in my chair, I wasn't guessing anymore. I knew exactly what could be undone, and what it would cost them if it was. My phone lit up on the table beside me. Seren's name flashed across the screen, then disappeared, replaced by a missed call notification I didn't open. A few seconds later, another message came in, something about a vendor needing confirmation, something that a week ago I would have handled immediately. I turned the phone face down, not out of anger, just because it no longer belonged to me. I looked back at the document, at the columns I had just built, at the structure of something that had once felt overwhelming and now felt clear. For the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting. I was deciding. And the next step wasn't going to be a conversation. I started with the venue the next morning, not because it was the biggest expense, but because it was the one everything else depended on. If that fell apart, the rest would follow. I stepped outside my building before making the call, the early air still cool, the street quieter than usual. For a second, I just stood there, phone in my hand, watching a car idle at the curb. Then I dialed. "Susan, hi, this is Talia Rowan." There was a pause on the other end, then recognition. Of course. "Everything okay on your end?" I let that question sit for a breath. "I need to cancel the reservation," I said. Silence just for a moment. Not surprised, not alarmed, more like recalculating. "All right," she replied, voice steady. "We're still within the partial refund window, so we can walk through what that looks like." No pushback, no attempt to convince me otherwise. Just process. She explained the timeline, the percentages, what would be returned and what wouldn't. I took notes out of habit, even though I had already mapped most of it out the night before. By the time the call ended, the anchor was gone. I didn't linger on it. I opened my list and moved to the next name. The caterer picked up on the second ring. A little more surprised, a little more hesitant, but still professional. We went through the same sequence: confirmation, cancellation, revised invoice. The florist followed, then the rental company, then the bartending staff. Each call sounded slightly different, but the pattern held. "Are you sure?" "Yes." "Do you want to reschedule instead?" "Okay, we'll process this and send confirmation." No explanations beyond what was necessary, no justifications. I didn't need them. Some of them already knew. Not in detail, not my version of it, but enough to recognize the shift. One of them, the photographer, paused before ending the call and said quietly, "I hope everything works out for you. Not for the wedding. For me." I thanked her and hung up. By mid-afternoon, my list was almost entirely checked off. A few deposits were gone for good. Most of the larger payments were already moving back through the system, pending reversals or partial refunds. I logged into my account once just to confirm the numbers. Then I closed it. The last thing on the list wasn't a call, it was a folder. I opened the shared drive, the one Saren had access to, the one everyone treated like it would always just be there. Inside, everything was exactly where I left it. Contracts, seating charts, vendor timelines, backup plans layered on top of backup plans. Months of work organized down to the smallest detail. I selected all of it. For a second, the cursor hovered, not because I was unsure, because I was aware of what it represented, of how much time had gone into it, of how easily it had been taken for granted. Then I downloaded a copy to my personal drive, closed the window, and deleted the entire folder. No sound, no confirmation beyond a small notification in the corner of the screen. Just gone. I sat back and let the silence settle. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like removing something that had never really belonged where it was. My phone started ringing a few minutes later. I didn't need to check the name. By the time I picked up, her voice was already breaking. "What did you do?" I held the phone a little away from my ear, not to avoid it, just to hear it clearly. There was something unraveling in the background, panic, confusion, pieces moving too fast for her to keep up with. The venue just called. The caterer, too. They're saying everything's been canceled. Tell me this is a mistake. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the blank space where the shared folder used to be. "It's not," I said. There was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by a rush of words that didn't quite land in full sentences. My name over and over again. Questions layered on top of accusations. "You can't just do that," she said finally. "Do you have any idea what this does to me?" I let that sit between us for a second. "I do," I replied, because I had seen it already line by line, contract by contract. Every piece that depended on something I had put in place. "This is my wedding," she added, like saying it out loud might put things back where they were. I glanced at my screen, still open to the document I had built the night before. "It was," I said, "when I was part of it." The silence that followed was different. Not confusion this time, recognition. And for the first time since this started, nothing needed to be explained. Everything was already gone. The calls didn't stop after that. They just changed tone. My mom left a voicemail first. Her voice was tight, controlled in that way she used when she was trying not to sound like she was choosing sides. "Talia, I don't understand why you would do this without talking to anyone. Your sister she's really upset." I listened to it once, then set the phone down on the counter without responding. A few minutes later, my dad called. He didn't leave a message, just tried again and then again, like persistence might force a different outcome. I turned the ringer off, not out of spite, just because I didn't have anything to add. The apartment was quiet that evening. No notifications, no open tabs, no half-finished lists waiting for me to come back and fix something. I heated up leftovers I barely tasted and sat at the table longer than necessary, staring at a surface that for the first time in months didn't hold paperwork. At some point, my phone lit up again, a text this time, from my mom. "You didn't have to do it like this." I read it once then, again, noticing the way it was phrased. Not what had been done to me, not what had been said, just the way I had responded. I set the phone down without typing anything back, because there wasn't a version of that conversation that would land the way they wanted it to. Later that night, I opened my laptop not to check emails, not to track anything, just to search. Cabins, Washington coast, something small, quiet, far enough that no one could just show up unannounced. I found one tucked into a stretch of trees near the water. No signal, no Wi-Fi, just a wood stove and a narrow path that led down to the shoreline. I booked it without overthinking, packed a bag before I could second-guess myself. And the next morning, before the city fully woke up, I locked my door and left. No explanation, no follow-up, just space I didn't have to defend. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the photos. One room, a narrow bed by the window, a wood stove that clicked softly as it warmed up. The air smelled faintly like cedar and something older, like the place had been holding its breath for a long time before I got there. I set my bag down and didn't unpack right away. Just stood there for a minute listening. No notifications, no traffic, no voices carrying through walls. It took a day or two for the quiet to stop feeling unfamiliar. I walked down to the water that first evening, shoes sinking slightly into the damp sand, the tide pulling back in slow, steady rhythm. There was nothing I needed to check, nothing waiting for me to fix, just time moving forward without asking anything from me. I stayed out there until the light faded. When I came back inside, I made tea and actually drank it while it was still warm, set the cup on the table and let my hands rest around it a little longer than necessary. For the first time in a while, nothing felt unfinished. Not because everything had been resolved, but because I had stopped holding things together that were never mine to carry.